Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Humans of Ottoman People, Ottoman Humans. And we have a very dear guest with us. But before I introduce him to you, I just would like to also celebrate and congratulate your Eid. Happy Eid and Bayram to you all. And as I said, we have a very exciting guest today. Actually, exciting guest is an understatement. He's a celebrity historian. I'll tell some more things about him. And as you know, in last couple of weeks, we have been talking about like the Ottomans and the way the Ottomans knew the world. And we'll look at the geographers and then sailors and other Ottoman bureaucrats and then ambassadors. And we learned that, after all, Ottomans were actually not so clueless about the world and about the world around themselves and about themselves. And today we are going to look at another group of people, spies. And of course, spies are the people who expanded the Ottoman knowledge about themselves and others. And Emrah is perhaps the best person to talk to about the spies. And of course, we all know that, spies are the exciting people throughout the history. We all know stories of them like Mata Haris and James Bonds and many more. And during the Cold War times, probably more than half of the movies were devoted to spies in Hollywood. But we are going to go beyond those stories today. And then Emrah is going to take us to the history, and he's going to take us to the gory details of espionage world in early modern world. For me, one of the main questions about the Ottomans was that, what was the ultimate goal of the Ottomans and Ottoman spies? What did they want to know? But we are going to have many more questions beside that. And I'm going to also ask our audience to drop their questions to our QA boxes. As you know, we have a QA box and then also chat. You can please ask your questions and curiosities, share your curiosities with us. And toward the end of the conversations, I'm hoping to entertain some of these questions with you. But before I go further, I want to just come to the most exciting part of our talk. That is the story of our guests. As you know, one of the goals of this program is to, have a conversation about major topics through human histories and human stories. But, the storytellers are also very important people. And today our storyteller is Emrah. Rather than treating him as a historian for the sake of our program and then keeping the trust of our program, I would like to treat him as a storyteller and then start telling about his story. Emrah, just please, again, welcome to our program, and then tell us about your story. How did you develop an interest into this subject? How did you learn? How things got unfolded in your long and successful career?
I've been trained as a political scientist originally when I was at Bilkent University in Ankara, one of the most boring places on earth, even though Turkey's capital, not much to do. So I was a political scientist, and one thing that I believe differentiates a social science that deals with today and one that deals with the past is the availability of documents. So it would be unfair if I say I chose this subject. It didn't turn out to be, and I don't believe that we guide our students very well about that. So I also urge if there are any graduate students about to choose their subject watching here, they should first choose their capabilities and then their sources and then go for the subject. That's what I did. So when I first started as an MA student, I started to work with Halil İnalcık. I first I knew back then French and Spanish, and then I learned Italian and Latin and all the other languages. And of course, with this kind of a skill set, so I would have done, if it were my choice, and mutatis mutandis, all things being equal, with necessary changes, I would have probably chosen something like 19th century. And no sane person would want to study 16th century. Why would you do that? Because as a 22-year-old kid, your mind is buggled with modern questions. So but the languages I knew and the languages I didn't know back then, such as Russian, forced me to do something a little bit earlier. And also I had the opportunity to study with a giant of that period, 16th century, 17th, classical Ottoman age. So I did go to the archives and write documents. And at the time, there wasn't many people who were dealing, and there was nobody that were dealing with Ottoman Mediterranean history with some sort of a methodological finesse. Everybody was, there were a few people writing about those subjects. I don't want to belittle anybody's work, but nobody approached it from like choosing something like pirates or choosing something like the Mediterranean economy, something like that. So I didn't know anything. So I knew the events. So I went to the archives, first to Spain, first to Venice, then Spain, Florence, and then France, and all these sorts of things. And I started reading these documents, starting from the easiest ones to the hardest ones. And, I started with the Corsairs, but then I have come up with a lot of documents that were talking about spies. And it's a very dry subject when you think about it. It sounds very sexy, but there's not many analytical things that you can find in the literature. So in time, I started, devising my questions. And when I came to US to do my PhD at Georgetown, that was one of the subjects that I wanted to study, along with Corsairs, which I've already started studying a little bit, and slaves, and maybe sailors.
Sailors too, right?
Yeah, I have
captives, probably.
Captives, or even diplomats, Ottoman diplomats, and all sorts of stuff. So I did go, and I have never gone to an archive thinking only one subject. I just took a lot of notes and took a lot of documents to read with me. It's an everyday struggle. So it's just, spies were just one of these subjects that I would like to study. And that's how I got into it. And that's how I got out of it, having written my book in Turkish, which will be translated into English by Georgetown University Press next year, I believe.
Excellent.
Yeah,
excellent.
So,
I mean, I hear like such stories all the time from different colleagues that, most of the times their interest into a subject started with almost an accident. But the thing is, you got to love what you are doing, right? And then you develop a love and interest into it in the long run, and it became part of your identity, almost destiny. And I think your story is just one of those stories that started almost as an accident, as a force, rather than you choosing the subject chooses you, and then one thing's led to another.
And to my chagrin, because I don't like spy stories, I don't like James Bond. I wasn't. So I learned myself. For instance, with the Corsairs, I was always fascinated with Corsairs or like cowboys or stuff like that, because Corsairs are like cowboys in a way. But when it comes to spies, I didn't have this kind of I wasn't a big aficionado of, I wasn't a big fan of World War II movies or Matari type of thing.
Right.
But then when you really put your work into something, it's not easy. It's not hard to not to love a subject like this. I mean,
absolutely.
Exciting to these guys who work on ulema. I mean, what is there to love about the ulema? So they should be more boring. Mine at least weren't boring. So I get used to their being interesting. But the one big problem was that early modern espionage isn't exactly like espionage. That's one big problem. It is very clumsy. Right. It is very nascent, and it is very extracurricular. So before 1914, it's really hard to talk about some sort of, even in the 20th century, most spy stories are extremely well polished, exaggerated, the perfection of which is almost lacking in reality. Most of the spies, even in the 20th century, talk too much. They're clumsy. They bring misinformation. And even 20th century history of warfare is a warfare of misinformation, not disinformation, misinformation. They always get it wrong. I mean,
right. I mean, actually, that was kind of like my next question to you. I mean, we are all fascinated by the modern, again, spy stories. Again, Matahari, you already mentioned James Bond is another thing. I mean, I know that we are not going to find them in history, but still, nevertheless, I'm going to ask you some of your favorite spies down the line. But before that, I mean, let's just try to, again, define the whole espionage thing. Or intelligence and counterintelligence things in the times that you have been studying, most probably like in 16, 17, 18 centuries. I mean, what does to be a spy mean in those times? I mean, who were they? They were like, necessarily trained people by the states, or they were simply like soldiers, or happened to be, I don't know, ambassadors, or females, males. Who were they? And again, second part was like, what was this espionage world like in those centuries?
Well, first thing, before 19th century, training is very rare.
All right.
Like Ottomans trained Janissaries, we have some sort of standing armies, church-trained priests, but blah, blah, blah, and their method. But in reality, in warfare, training is very rare. If you want a navy, you go to the Corsairs, pirates. If you're in the Western Mediterranean, you go to Genoa and strike a deal with Andrea Doria. So obviously, they were not training spies. Only in the sense that 16th century was an era in which the first examples of ciphers, cryptology, cryptography was starting to happen in a very brief way. That was a century before all these mathematical things came into picture. So there wasn't any training, but even more than that, there wasn't any profession. Espionage is not a profession, it's a craft. Nobody is a spy per se. Everybody's something else, and using the ability to move frequently without any molestation, and the ability to establish contact with people who matters, and thus who can give them information. So they were doing it on the side. Let's say you're a merchant who has some sort of an access to Ottoman Pasha or the Viceroy of Naples. Or you're a merchant who can pretend to have that access. You don't even need to have that access. Then you come to Istanbul from Naples, right? And then some Pasha wants to buy something from you, or you are there and you establish some sort of connections. And then you say, I'm coming from Naples. I have some information to give to you. Okay, brief information doesn't make any money, because any ship that are coming from the east to the west, or west to the east. So if you're coming from Italy to Turkey, and they interrogate you and ask you questions like, okay, what about the preparations in the arsenals, in the naval arsenals of Naples, or vice versa? The Neapolitans could ask you, okay, what's happening in Istanbul? Is the Sultan sick? Is there a new Grand Vizier? So they want to know about this stuff. So that doesn't, that is not, that won't bring you money. But if you could come up with some sort of a detailed information, and even better than information, spies did not only bring information, but they also bring some sort of a plot. They always pretend to have some, secret connection with a guy in a castle who's ready to hand the keys to the first Christian who's gonna come, or like they have some sort of a sabotage plan, and they have all this network of spies from which they could acquire regularly. They could acquire information. So you have to come up with a scheme if you want to draw. If you want to get money from them, if you want to milk the authorities, you have to come up some sort of a scheme, it doesn't have to be wrong, but it doesn't have to be right either. More frequent than not, it is not correct.
So, can we then define like a spying? I'm just still at the level of a definition of spies and spying. If we defined the term as like the basic information gathering, right? So, at what point that becomes the job of a spy? Because everyone gathers some information, everyone shares in their information, right? Wherever they go, and then they come back and then share their information. But at what level that information gathering become?
When you get paid.
When you go, there you go.
You get paid. If they say you are espia de something, it means that you are on payroll. Because giving out information, like anybody living in Washington, D.C. or Ankara, or hold some, diplomatic exchange information is part of, it doesn't matter. Information is not, you can never know what kind of, you cannot say you will never give information to the enemy, because you're going to make trade. You're going to give some sort of information, but what sort of information you give? So information gathering is something much more. So if you go there
for a purpose, perhaps.
Here say they won't pay you any money. You're just doing what maybe they will give you a favor, or at least you won't get into trouble. But if you're going to a place, establish connections, and then have some information leaked to you, boom, and then you get paid for it, you're a spy.
Yeah, I mean, which means that also like
business, because you wanted to
yeah,
the definition so right. Are you trying to get into the business? But I mean,
right. Yeah, basically, I mean, they were like a part-time spies or part-time workers, and there was not a full-time spying was not a full-time job.
Full-time job. That wasn't a full-time job. Of course, we also have to. I mean, I'm not big about this. It doesn't matter which words they use because they use it inconsistently. But there is also the confidence, and somebody who's leaking information. We also have to differentiate. Spy is the guy who's moving in between those guys, and I use in my dissertation a more general word, a go-between or intermediary.
I see.
They do not only. Okay, there are two blocks. In the East, there's the Ottoman. They're Muslims, the conqueror of the Eastern Christians. On the other hand, you have a Catholic world, although divided, still led by the Habsburgs. So there are these boundaries, these two distinct worlds, in terms of not only informational boundaries, but also civilizational boundaries in customs, in religion, even in climate, when you look at from a certain perspective. So, but some of these boundaries need to be straddled, need to be fixed at certain times. Absolutely. Even though these two empires at each other's throats have to establish some sort of a connection in order to know each other, in order to cut a deal with each other. I found several letters exchanged between the Ottoman grandees and the Habsburg grandees, full of words of courtesy. So people move, letters move, and then increasing amount of literature about these subjects in English, in English books, in English literature. But still, at the time when I wrote it, there were fewer. You have Daniel Harshenzon, there were Eric Dursteller writing about this. So this kind of a world divided into doesn't very hold. I mean, at certain points, you have to somehow bring them together. So these spies were not only fixing the line, the informational gap, but they were also fixing the commercial gap, or commercial is easy to fix, but the civilization and cultural gap as well. They were also carrying all sorts of information that include culture, military and political developments, but they were also fixing the boundaries in the sense that they were carrying cultural goods, they were making trade, they were establishing connections between these two.
They were the transmitters, basically, like
all between intermediate
mutual.
But I mean, their information that they carry. Yeah, go on, please.
Right. I mean, their identities, right, by definition, supposed to be secret. We are supposed not to know them, but somehow you know them, right? I mean, how did you catch them? How are you catching them, basically, in the archives or in the things that you have been like researching so far? How do you know them?
I went to the archives. Well, here's the thing. I spent a lot of money gathering the documents. So I used to read documents simultaneously, and I used to get them, let's say 1561, and I used to read 1561 from Spain, from Venice, from Genoa, from Florence, from wherever you read, even from Malta when I was studying courses, not pirates. So you wouldn't believe the same guys appear in all of them. Not for two basic reasons. First of all, if you're somebody who's doing trade between Istanbul and then you go to Corfu and you go to Venice and Rome, let's say. It's not a very right scenario, but anyways. So if you're going to say, look, I know a guy in the Ottoman Empire who's a pasha, but he was a Christian who wants to go back to being a Christian, so he's ready to betray the Sultan. If you're going to say something like that in Venice, why not say the same thing in Rome? Maybe you'll get paid twice. So these guys were always, they realized how quickly they could make money out of it. So wherever they go, they came up with the same, similar, not always same, similar. And then the diplomats realized that, because if you propose something in Venice, and then if you propose a similar thing in Rome, and the Venetian ambassador knows about it, rise to Venice, and then they connect you. And second, that world was heavily connected. We are into, first of all, diplomatic correspondence, Madrid knows what happens in Naples, and what happens in Naples is closely connected to what happens in Venice, who brings information from the Ottomans. And also we have something called aviso, like a handwritten papers. They're changing like internet, like Twitter, all of that. Exaggerate. So Madrid was, even a remote place like Madrid, has got nothing to do with the Mediterranean when you look at the map. They were gathering information from the avisos, were frequently getting there. So there were all sorts of hearsay that would help them alert. But also these people knew them. Like the biggest, one of the biggest struggles there was in Istanbul in the 1560s. I wrote about them, a huge chapter, 100-page long chapter about the Spanish intelligence network in Constantinople for 20 years. I've tracked them down. And the event that caused their downfall was this. One of the guys coming from Naples met a friend in the streets of Galata. And he realized, because even it's a big world, there are only a couple of streets that everybody walks through. So
right.
They always,
the two main streets.
Yeah, even when you look at the Google Maps today, it's a huge world. And the cities are so little, dispersed as little dots. A similar thing happened all the time. You used to meet with the same people. These guys used to run into each other frequently, because even the world is the communication is not very good, but still they used to run into each other.
Sure, but I still assume that there were many of them still like buried in documents that we were not able to see, because by design or by definition, they were supposed to be secret in that world. Speaking of in that world, I mean, one of my curiosities about the Ottoman vision or ambition, to know themselves and to know about the world. So what was their ultimate goal, especially in the world of espionage? And what did they want to know? I mean, what was the most precious, say, knowledge, secret knowledge that they were after? What did they spend their invest in? What?
Where is the enemy armada?
Okay.
And even if there is the biggest problem, how big is it? Because if you're an Ottoman, you have to know how big is the Habsburg armada, one, and when are they going to finish their preparations? Because the answer to these two information will tell you, because you cannot sail all the time. Let's say if you prepare for the Spanish, if a Spanish viceroy, governor hears that the Ottomans are preparing 200 ships, it means that they are coming into the Western Mediterranean. So the Venetians and the Habsburg, everybody should be fearful.
Right.
But if they know by April 15 that they will not be ready for another 2 months, it means that they won't have enough time. Even if they come, they won't have enough time to undertake an operation of invasion. Because if you can start, there's a really good book about Empire and the Holy War in the Mediterranean, from IB Towers, written by Philip Williams. It explains very much in the eastern part of the world, Mediterranean world, you can start sailing earlier. So the Ottomans always have an advantage. They could set sail earlier than the Western Mediterranean fleets. So if they come earlier, it means that they could stay for months, like it happened in the 1550s and 1565. So they could stay in order to besiege a province, a city, and maybe conquer another entire province. So because then you have to arrange your resources. Because mind you, these are galleys. You have to re-equip them every year. You have to rebuild them every year. So if the enemy is coming strong, you'll have a stronger navy. And if you build 200 ships, when the Ottomans are not coming, you just spend your money for nothing.
Yeah, that also very much connected to the whole issue of communication, right? I mean, even if you get this info, I mean, how are you going to send that info back to the headquarters or wherever it was needed, right? I mean, today, just with one tweet, you can send your thing to anywhere in the world in 1 second. But back then, even if you have some precious intelligence, say from Madrid or from the other end of Mediterranean, how are you going to send that info back to, say, Tunisia or Algeria or Italy or Istanbul or Salonika? How did you do that?
There are a number of ways.
As a spies.
First of all, you write them with invisible inks. First of all, you pretend to write as a merchant or as a slave asking for money from your friends or from your family. And then you write, there's one example here. I don't know whether you will see it.
Sure, that would be nice.
Something like this. Then you write at the back with either urine or onion juice or some sort of a steganography technique, like invisible. But then you just put some sort of a keyword, and I have discovered that there is this word, honorando. It doesn't mean anything. Like it doesn't mean honorable. It means honoring. But you will never write in the recipe, and then I realized that any letter, that has this really red ink, which is a very short way of, understanding. Okay, this letter is not written to anybody in Alicante. It has honorando, so this goes to the chancellery, and they will just, torment it, or like, this is what they do basically. The red ink appears. This is one of the ways, and then the big problem is the postal service between Istanbul and Europe. The only postal service belongs to the Venetians. So the Venetians had this advantage, and this early cabinet noir, like where they, unseal and reseal the letters before, dispatching them forward to European capital, which created a lot of diplomatic scandals. So one part of it is always, one part of it espionage is diplomacy. The other part is warfare. From that point of view.
But most of these stories are mainly from the 16th century, right? That's what I understand. Because when you come to, for example, the 17th century, now you have the Levant Company, and then ships are like traveling so fast from London to Smyrna or Istanbul in 2-3 weeks' time. So things are apparently also changing rapidly, right?
They can be as fast in the 16th century. Nothing changed. Because they're using...
Not much.
No, not much of them. Because I have calculated some arrival times, if I can find it. It's been 4 years since I wrote books. I start forgetting about it. Like for instance, something like the Battle of Lepanto, reached Istanbul in 17 days. It's not a big deal, maybe. But again, let's say something that happened in Lisbon can reach in 6 weeks. Can reach Istanbul in 6 weeks. Or like the assassination of the French king from Paris to Istanbul requires 7 weeks. Of course, this could have gone in the context of the Europeans. They may be acquiring information in a faster way, thanks to the already established ways of merchant letters. But that kind of a Levant company already had a precedent in the Fuggiers, the letters. So that's not exactly. I mean, the real breaking point is the steamship. Before the steamship,
absolutely, 19th century,
with muscle and wind, you can only,
and the luck. You have to be lucky. So I mean, if you talk about like heyday of Ottoman espionage interest, I mean, do you have any sultan or any period that where Ottomans were keen or keener in that business?
We do not.
I don't know.
Even though we always talk about Suleiman and blah blah blah blah,
Selim II.
It's really hard to, because we do not have ego documents. We do not have diaries. We do not have newspapers. We do not have, we have the Divan registered, but they do not tell us who does what. Like, what does Sultan do? We know that Sokolo seems very interested because he's interested in European affairs, from Italy to, but maybe we only know his story. Maybe there are other people. Like in my case, Uluçali, the Ottoman Grand Admiral for 15 years, was too much into it, and he was always trying to fool the Sultan. I wrote an article about that in which how he fabricated information, and at one point he even staged a mise en scène. He staged a fake theater, providing somebody pretending to bring information, pretending to be attacked by enemy corsairs, and when they actually interrogated him with falaka, like by beating the soles of his shoes, his feet, he confessed that he was paid by Uluçali to fool the Sultan. So Uluçali was one figure. Yeah, I mean, this whole business in a way, because Uluç then says, look, I have come here as a pirate. I need to make money, and you make me carry guns and janissaries to the Caucasus in order to fight the Persians. What the hell? I want a war in the Mediterranean. I want to fight in the Mediterranean because we have
to make money.
Yeah, I need money because I need 3,000. I need 3,000 slaves to feed. It's like a political party. If you can, like the political parties, when at least in Turkey, when you come to power, there are all these cronies and all these people that you somehow have to find a way to accommodate using the state. So similar thing with the pirates. If they come to the Ottoman Empire, they need to be. If there's too much work in the arsenal, then all these slaves will be government-paid people working in the arsenal, because they're not like slaves in plantations. They're skilled slaves, which means that they're carpenters, they're sailors.
Right.
So if there's the big armada, it's not Uluç who's going to pay that. It is the Ottoman state. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, from your other readings, I remember that one of your main points was that, in the Ottoman Empire, we did not necessarily have a more institutionalized espionage network, whereas in some of the European countries, you have more of an institutionalized ones, and you are comparing them, talking about advantages and disadvantages. I mean, toward that end, can you just make some comment on the the spies of the sultans, and also spies of other pashas and other interest group in the Ottoman Empire? Apparently, it was much decentralized, that profession.
The Ottomans. Two things define the other. One is decentralization and local autonomy, and the second is patrimonial system. That wasn't broken in Western Europe, but there were at least some sort of the trials at the hands of the Habsburgs, for instance, who trying to institute some sort of a written, well-codified system of espionage, some sort of an office regulating these espionage. But in the Ottoman case, I have never come across something like that. In the Ottoman case, I'm not sure. It is not that dissimilar to the Habsburg case, because they were also coming from a feudal background. But still, Madrid was keeping an eye on what the Viceroy of Naples were doing. They were the ones who were approving the money that has been spent.
Right.
But in the Ottoman case, we see somebody like Sokollu could pay from out of his own pocket these spies, because the information he gathers serves him rather than the Ottomans. So you have some sort of a multiple foci of power gathering information and then choosing among them according to their political interests. It doesn't mean that it is not that it has never occurred in Europe, but that was Europe. In Europe, emerging central government try to find a solution to this problem and establish some sort of institution. It is easy to establish some sort of central control in a republic like Venice, where everything is elected and everything is elected for only 6 months or a year, because it's a very depersonalized rule. But if in the Habsburg case, we still have to see there's this Gran Espia, the great spy, or the superintendent of the intelligence, something like that, sounds as a head of CIA or something like that. And there, even still, the personal relations play an important role. But they at least have establish some sort of a protocol run from the center, like the ciphers were sent from the center, the money was approved from the center. There was heavy from the standard of the day. There was a heavy control from the center. In the Ottoman case, we didn't have something like that. The Ottomans were run by different couples competing with each other, and I believe the confiscation also runs at the center of the system. When Rüstem dies, he has so much. I mean, he has his entire worth is, I think, 1 or 2 years of the Ottoman, equal to a year of Ottoman budget, or something like that. That money was not given him for his own purposes. That money was given him in order to do something, in order to keep
for the state.
Because in order to remain in power, he also has to run a large household. If you read Evliya Çelebi, you will see, for instance, Melek Ahmet Pasha has 8 palaces and thousands of people following him. Why? Because this guy is like a political party. When it comes to power, to bring those guys. There is, they're not paying him out of his pocket all the time, but so.
But maybe, yeah. But because of that, perhaps like we maybe like need to redefine this whole issue of centralization and then decentralization in the pre-modern times, right? I mean, in the case of like Melek Hamapişa or other people that you are giving an example, I mean, they were, yes, working independently, but indirectly they were also working for the state. Therefore, I mean, we couldn't probably say that, you know, state did not involve in this kind of, you know, business.
Istanbul, of course, Istanbul is not all the time involved. The state is the archive. Then you're going to get the archive is all about Istanbul. And it's really hard. It's really hard to catch a spy under direct control because the documents are not that friendly. That's why we have to wait until 2017 for a book to appear on Ottoman Empire.
You're right. You're right, and as I said, I'm sure that there are like hundreds, if not thousands, of people are still waiting to be discovered by you or your students. I hope. But so far, like we have been always talking about, like, you know, Ottoman spying on other states and empires and other entities. I mean, how about like, you know, others spying on the Ottomans? I mean, who or which nation or nations or empires had an interest, especially espionage interest, on the Ottoman Empire?
Well,
I'm sure that we have like spies on the streets of Istanbul.
Yeah, the greatest information gatherers are the Venetians, because the merchant republics have colonies all over the place. They have, so they need to get information because it's very feasible. You already have to get information in order to make money, right? So you need political information, not for political purposes, but much more importantly for merchant purposes, for economic purposes. You have to be able to know what's going on in the capital. So, and it's also a republic, which means that everything is run very smoothly, and there are all these, you know, it's a very bureaucratic thing that uses a lot of different people. So it's that they run their republic with a huge number of people. If you look how the Venetian state works, you will be appalled. It works probably really like a modern state. So Venetians are exception, though. And the other
Spaniards and Habsburgs. I mean,
the other power that really have that have more to lose from any miscalculation of Ottoman intention, Ottoman power, were these Habsburgs in Vienna and in Madrid, and also in Naples. Even though Naples belonged to Madrid, they were, you know, they were getting information from different. Sicily was getting information about North Africa. Naples were getting information about Istanbul, and Vienna were getting information about Hungary. So they all had different spheres of influence. And Madrid, and especially if you go to, you know, the documents coming from Barcelona, they were mostly concerned with Algiers rather than Istanbul. So even from the start, they, you know, divergent. So the idea is, if the Ottomans can attack you, you should be worried about it, and you should get information about it. That's the basic rule, because, you know, for otherwise you wouldn't want to.
But we are still, like, you know, in and around Mediterranean. I mean, this espionage network was going beyond
probably
Mediterranean. I mean, like, you have Russia, you have, I don't know, like China, you have Africa, perhaps. I know that I'm stretching our imagination, but just wondering how big that espionage world was.
First of all, let me read. Somebody wrote that I should slow down. Yes, that's true. They always wondered. In Turkey, I'm famous with my
fast speaking.
So they were always making fun of me, asking me whether I was speaking French and, you know, English, Italian that fast as well. Yes, so that's a proof that I actually can't help myself. I will speak more slowly. Yes, it's a bigger world, but the problem is that the archives in the 16th century are generally better in Venice, Florence, Genoa.
Emrah, you can speak a bit faster. Don't worry. Yeah, now you got slow down.
No, I'm trying to think. Venice, Florence, Madrid, Istanbul, and this kind of region. So if you want to go to Russia, there was no Russia to speak of. We don't have any. I don't know Russian. So of course, there are other works concentrating not in the Mediterranean, especially a lot of works about Elizabethan secret services. Getting a little bit dull because they're always writing the same thing. Yes, there were, but still, 16th century is the Renaissance, and Renaissance is important. is because of the cryptography. The most developments in cryptography was made at the hands of the Renaissance factotums, and it's the center of diplomacy, and still it's the center of commerce and trade, and it housed one of the biggest world wars of pre-modern era. The Ottomans and the Habsburgs fought between 1530s and 1590s, first in the Hungary, but 1545 and 1590s again for 55 years. They also fought in the Mediterranean. So also, the Mediterranean is an extremely good place where you can see how people move, how information move, how letters move.
Sure, I mean, like in the 16th century, there is no doubt that it was almost like the center of the world, like commercially, technologically, scientifically.
It was changing, but they couldn't. I mean, we have a very vibrant. We have good works in French that deals with Portuguese information gathering about Ottomans in the Indian Ocean. But again, it's on the, it depends on which area you choose. I don't believe that the basic rules will change in terms of techniques of espionage will change a lot. Maybe
a lot.
It depends on the archives. You need to find sources. Espionage is not exactly something that you wouldn't find in one. There's no place where you won't find spies. People like to gossip, and so if you gossip, you're at least a confidant. And if you gossip for money, you're a spy.
Yeah. I mean, again, like money, but to me, almost like all form of information gathering for any purpose. That's the starting point. But it turns to making money, of course. I mean, it becomes a profession at that regard. So, but now, since the world is becoming bigger in the world of espionage, there were obviously many people who did have a double loyalties. I'm sure that they were just bringing information from here to there. So when they were caught, what happens to them?
Well, sometimes
they were.
Well, they were caught, and that's why we know of them. I mean, they were detected. That's why we know of them. And sometimes they were caught. Sometimes they are. It depends on the mood. Seriously, sometimes they just got away with it, offering something else in return. Sometimes they get, flayed. Sometimes they get tortured. It depends. Seriously, I've explained, not in my book in Turkish, but in my dissertation, which they can find in ProQuest. I think in the second chapter, which was a really long chapter, if you discount the introduction about the spies and their life, they went through all sorts of ordeals, because now you want them to talk about what other spies, but sometimes they even gave them money and sent them back as counter spies.
I see. Okay, great. Please go ahead. I mean, now we have a good understanding of, again, the Ottoman world of spies and the world around them. Since we are kind of approaching to the end of the program, I want to talk also about states spying on their own people. I mean, it is not only about spying on other nations, but spying as a form of social control, right? I mean, especially this is going to be the case, of course, in the modern times more, but I assume that, it was also the case in previous times too, that, the states spying on their people. I mean, what is your insight on that issue in the Ottoman times? I mean, did Ottoman authorities, not the Sultan himself, but any institution or any authority in the Ottoman times, spying on their own people with the hope of, again, controlling, manipulating, changing, or doing things for the sake of state?
Well, what they do in the 16th century is mostly, drown them in a river and then, pretend that he was found dead. That's what they did with a lot of supporters of Shah Ismail, and you can go to the museum. I haven't studied that subject per se, but what I see is that there were some underhand executions based on, or they were gathering from, especially in Anatolia, and in Istanbul, how they dealt with it. I have never seen that in documents, but it doesn't mean that they didn't exist, because I've never looked into the inside domestic espionage. But I know from the followers of Shah Ismail, or the Alevis were actually, there are a lot of examples where they got killed basically, and they say, kill them and then pretend that it's been there. So you go to Muhammad, you find like this, or some enemy spies, for instance, again as a foreign part of it.
Right.
They were also killed.
Right.
There are all this kind of thing that we associate with modern state, but they could have done it. They could do it much more easily back then, obviously. So, but like a propaganda thing, it was all religious, and I think rather than
mostly, yes,
we should look at the policies. Like you would know this better, but how they dealt with the tech case, how they actually delegalized some of them, it's a carrot and stick tactics in order to create a Sunni thing, and then manipulate the idea of using all this symbology. But troublemakers, probably, yes, they have gathered information and dealt with them, but I've read those documents, and I don't believe that there will be very much that will be uninteresting stuff. He talked about Saddam, blah, blah, but the Ottomans' main Foucault moment is the Shia issue, which
that true, and of course, like in the 19th century, I know that this is not necessarily interest of this talk, but by the 19th century, especially in time of during time of Abdulhamid II, right? State is going to be very conscious of gathering information about their people. All the journals and then all other information gathering is going to be part of, state's business to keep the social control.
But why keep those documents? I mean, once you deal with them, these rogues and these nobodies, if there are any documentation, paper trail behind, probably they were.
But by definition, again, they were supposed to be secret documents. By definition, they were gone at some point, probably.
Yeah.
Okay, coming back to the fun parts, and this is one of the fun parts that I always like. I mean, give us your most favorite, 3 spy names from Ottoman times. Again, they don't have to be necessarily James Bond or Mata Hari, but I'm sure that there were some interesting spies, colorful spies from your times.
One is who always makes up stories, and finally they realize they're all false. So they cut his ear and put him in a galley. So he's a useless spy. And the other is Baron de la Fage. This is a guy who works for the English ambassador here, but also once he was imprisoned and he was rescued by the French ambassador. And later he was sent to Italy by the Ottomans, where he contacted the Venetians, Florentines, and the Romans, all with different projects, got that money from them, and even talked in front of the cardinals. And then before coming back from Venice, he convinced a couple of Venetian boys, why don't you travel to Istanbul with me? And then they realized that he's taking them in order to force them to be Muslims, and maybe just use them somehow. So there was a big crisis between diplomats. So this guy, wherever he goes, he creates problems. Baron de la Fage, his story is in my book and in dissertation. So this is my second guy. And a third guy. Well, let me these two always stand out.
No, you don't have to. I mean, if they are only ones who were worthy of making a movie about them, that would be nice. Maybe you may think of writing a script for them.
There's this family, Gasparo Corso, from Corsica. One guy is in Algiers, another guy is in Alicante or someplace. One is in Barcelona, the other is in Marseille. So they're all these, and they're merchants, contrabandiers, and all these sorts of stuff. So these are the third guys. It's not a guy, but one of them.
I see. Were there also, speaking of guys and males, were there also female spies?
One in the Mediterranean, which may be a fake thing, and there's some mentions in Flanders during the Dutch War, but this is because the historian has confused a confidant who's leaking information, who has privileged information, and then shares it with a spy who moves. One big problem: women don't move. Few people move.
Right.
Women can't move. Yeah, and they can, physically, it's really hard for them to move. Security, So apart from a number of exceptional women who fought both on land and on a ship, we do not have many women spies in the 16th, 17th centuries. Even though, again, there are also works about women who run away from monasteries and gone to Mexico, like Catalina de Arauso. There's a book like that. And we have women in the Renaissance or 16th, 17th century Italy dressed up as men and even fought duels, like Casanova conquering other women. There are all these exceptional women, but the rule is men did that, not women. So the women women have a different advantage as confidence, because they have access to places where I, as a man, cannot have access. Because, you know, not only, I'm not want to talk about harems, but you would trust a woman more because they can't play an active role in public. So again, they have to always remain behind the shadow, behind the curtain, and that they actually gave them an advantage as confidants. But of course, then how are you going to differentiate between the reality and the subjective of the source? Because also the source is a little bit, you know, patriarchal when it comes to women. They're always portrayed as makers, so hard to tell. But again, I've come across a lot of women in established positions where they could have access to confidential information. We're more than happy to share them. But
before I move to the questions asked by our audience, just last big question for you. I mean, why it is important to study or know about spies? What does it tell us? Like knowing and studying the subject. It's a subject that you have been probably spending years so far.
I have done it. I have taught spies as part of a larger project. I want to understand how good ideas, information, ladders move between different parts of, not only two parts, between different parts of the Mediterranean, and between the East and the West, between the first Muslim East and a Christian West, and between the North and South, prosperous North, poor South, North where the ships move, North where we see big arsenals, North where we see big states, and South where you don't have any coastal navigation because of geographical factors, and South where you don't have gunpowder states appearing, and South where you don't have rich fertile hinterlands. So how do you think socioeconomic and cultural characteristics and all these different regions that were bound together by first spies, second by commerce, third by piracy, and fourth by slavery. So this is part of my project.
I mean, that's great. Actually, you know,
apart from that, there's nothing analytical about it. I seriously can't tell that. Apart from that, spies are, you know, I'm a very frank guy. One of the biggest problems that I ran into, even though it's fun, there is no historical discussion if you're not very imaginative. So I discussed it in terms of emerging diplomacy and state formation, which I left out in my book, but dissertation has it. So there's this rational state or the emerging, not rational, but emerging state. So I've looked at it from a very state-centered perspective. But apart from that, your only shot is to create some sort of a prosopographic spy image and the cultural. But apart from that, seriously, it's not going to lead you to big questions. So,
but at the same time, as you already said, Emrah, I mean, you know, this has been like part of other larger stories. I mean, we have to have like sailors and
the Mediterranean. My issues with 1500s and 1600s Mediterranean had 4 children, and 2 of them are already done, spies and
I mean, again, in the last couple of weeks and then next week too, we have been talking about the goal, like, you know, merchants and ambassadors, sailors, captives, corsairs, privateers, and now spies. They're all part of this bigger picture.
The one that was not studied was spies, and the other that was really badly studied was corsairs. And that I believe in that I chose these 2 to begin with, because there are lots of good, perfect studies about merchants. And one thing that was important for an Ottomanist was I could document both in Sultan'ın Casusları and Sultan'ın Korsanları my work on corsairs. I could get into daily life. I could get into the little people. The Ottoman documents never give you these, detailed people. No, you won't see nobody. The nobody is absent in the Ottoman documents, like all these small stories, because all the documents are from Istanbul. They are internal correspondence. Most of the time, especially in the 16th century, they are rather summaries. Okay, so by using like 10 different European archives, I use that to my advantage in order to come up with stories, normal people who are trying to make money by espionage or who were betrayed by their future father-in-law and then went to Tunis to be a corsair, come back to his village and, kill his stuff like that, revenge stories, jealousies, all these, accusations of, witchcraft even, how people understood little people. It was really hard to find them from the Ottoman documents. And, just because I know, a lot of languages, I use them to that advantage. But it's not something that was brought only by spies, but that daily life, that cultural reintegration of different regions, and the emergence of new things such as diplomacy, a new way of warfare, an emerging state. All these I have dealt in my larger projects. So I could have chosen something else, but I chose spies because nobody had studied it. And those who studied it were just giving information. But it's really extremely hard to study. I have to not only in terms of reading documents, but also in terms of finding some sort of historical discussion. Because it was really, because nobody, nobody discussed that, from a analytical point of view before, because everyone was talking about, everybody's basic argument was this: Queen Elizabeth had spies. That was the conclusion of everybody. So what the hell? What am I going to do with this information? The Ottomans had spies. My professor Gabaragos already wrote a 20-page article proving that the Ottomans were getting information from a number of sources. So what am I? Another 3 years of archival work, and I will prove the same thing? No, thank you. You have to find something.
So what? Yeah, I mean, the last couple of sentences that you are making, it's nicely tying to what we have been trying to do in this program. That we are really after human stories, but without losing it to tying them to larger common humanity. I mean, we are somewhere in between, right? I mean, we have small stories, but those small stories also connected to some big human characteristics and common humanities, basically. Now, I have several questions, but I'll try to be fair and ask some of them to you. The first question is coming from Inci Bowman. She's asking about Akıncılar, those like frontier soldiers. And then she's asking, Akıncılar moved with Ottoman empires, and then they gathered informations, and would we consider them as spying? That was first question.
They were much more qualified than spies. It's called reconnaissance missions, and the corsairs and the pirates on the seas, and Akıncılar not only Akıncılar, but all sorts of patrol troops gathered information. They were much more prestigious, and they had much more money. They got much more money, and they had job security, so they were far better than spies. And most of the time, if you are on a borderland, if you're on the frontier, your job consists of, spying on the enemy. Yes. So
excellent. I mean, we have two related questions. One is coming from Mustafa Tunç, and another coming from anonymous audience attendee, asking about actually institutionalization. Simply put, were there any organized national intelligence service department in the empire? You kind of, explain this, but you may want to say
the best example
maybe two more sentences on that.
Yeah, I tried to explain it in the dissertation and also in the book. Maybe you could look at there. In Venice is the perfect example where they established some sort of, it's in my dissertation. Habsburgs tried it, but they then fell back on it. So that also shows us that things don't go like this. It's all ebbs and flows. It wasn't very realistic, and I believe also in terms of diplomacy as well. We should go back from here to back, basically saying if something succeeded in the 19th century, it doesn't mean it was feasible in the 16th century as well. So having no institutionalized information gathering was okay. Ottomans carried, and I discussed it in a very long last chapter. Ottomans, received information as healthy as the Habsburgs, even though they didn't have some sort of a similar. Institutionalized body. Venetians were different. They were more efficient, but for other purposes. So again, I tried to explain that in my dissertation, I believe.
Right. Great. Thank you. Another question is coming from John Glavery, asking, were there any significant historical event, like wars and conflicts and treaties and whatnot, put into motion by the actions that can be connected to spy? Like, meaning spies did lead to any big historical event that you know of?
By rule, any military confrontation has happened because of the spies. Because first you have to realize where the enemy was, right? You need some sort of a reconnaissance mission. So from a broader point of view, any battlefield, any battle on the field requires some sort of information gathering. But from a very small perspective, we can say in the Cyprus campaign, I explained the Ottomans could disembark soldiers and besiege the castle only because they knew that the enemy fleet was not ready. And also Lepanto happened because of the spies, because that's how they knew about where the Ottomans were, for instance. And also one big failure that actually wrecked the Christian, that ended in a Christian disaster, was the Battle of Gerba. And when the Ottoman army, it took 4 days in 4 days from Çanakkale to Libya, and everybody was on shore, and you see the enemy fleet. It takes several hours to embark, so you're left on a beach with nothing. So there was all this shock and panic, and they lost. The Battle of the Gerba was won by the Ottomans without fighting, actually. It was a bloodbath. That was due to a failure of intelligence gathering.
Great. There was another question about Casanova. Is there any, did Casanova in his ways ever come in contact with Ottoman diplomats?
I haven't studied that time period. Possibly.
Okay. But could be. You could say just a could be. I
wouldn't be surprised.
Another question we have about Jewish network and its influence on the espionage, because we know that Jews have been all around the Mediterranean.
Any fifth column, Jews, Neapolitan Forushuti, like the rebel aristocrats who were exiled, Jews, anybody who fled the Inquisition, Moriscos, and here as well. If you go to Spain, you will see huge amount of correspondence between the Orthodox in the Balkans, some of them church officials, and the Habsburgs. They expected Habsburgs to help them, and they did help them. These two helped each other in 1571, 1572, when the Ottoman Navy was crushed by the Habsburgs, by the Christians. So the Christians always thought these Christians are Christian brothers in the Balkans will always rise. And I don't know whether they could deliver their promises, but they always remain in correspondence. And Spanish archives are full of letters in Greek, and some of them translated into Spanish. That would be a lovely subject to concentrate upon. Archives are full with them.
Okay. There you go. Another question about Queen Elizabeth. You already said that she had spies. Yeah, now we know it. Did she have any spies in the Ottoman Empire?
Everybody had spies in the Ottoman Empire. Apart from Chinese or the Siamese, everybody had, yes. Queen Elizabeth had a diplomat, and he has spies, and some of them you can use by calendar. You can understand by looking at the calendar of state papers. Again, yes, there are a lot of English spies. Not necessarily fighting against Ottomans, but fighting against other spies, thwarting their ambitions, stuff like that.
Okay, now we are going a bit over time. I'm asking your patience. One more last question, then probably we should just wrap up today. I think that's a very basic question, and it's a speculative one too. One of our audience is asking, how would you trust the information that you get from
You
the spy? It is just a...
You cross-check. They always cross-check. They always gather information about. Also, in one part of my book, not in this, but in one part, I discuss. There are like 10 different sources of information coming from all over the place during the Battle of Lepanto. You cross-check. And there's one question that I would like: why the Ottomans didn't gather more information before going to Siege of Malta? They did. Siege of Malta is a perfect operation. They knew strategically it makes perfect sense, but they didn't listen. And also sometimes you just make mistakes. Look at some of the biggest mistakes of World War II.
Right.
The French expected the Germans from the wrong side. The D-Day had to happen in Pas-de-Calais and in Normandy. So all sorts of information. It doesn't matter whether you have information. You probably have information. Which information is correct? And sometimes they insist on, in 1940, the French had the right information, but they didn't listen because listening costed politically. So they didn't listen, and they suffered. So sometimes they just don't listen. People weren't more intelligent in the past, even though a pasha or a general, they could be as stubborn and they could be as so.
Okay, thank you very much, Emrah. Thanks really for spending more than an hour with us, and thanks for all the audience who have been patiently listening and enjoying, I hope, our talk.
You will have a slight headache because of my, loud voice and a way of speaking.
Fast speaking.
Yes.
But we cannot make him to speak slower and slower. It is not for us. We are not the first to try to slow him down. Anyway, thank you very much again.
You've been there several times.
Yes, but what we learned today is that this world was very much connected, and then spies were the main agents and actors with their stories and interests and dual or triple loyalties, and it was an interesting world where we had indeed some Mata Haris and James Bonds and other similar characters in history. And having said that, I want to say again, goodbye to everyone and happy Bayram one more time. And I hope to see you in another program next week when we will be talking about Corsairs as a complementary to this program, I hope. Okay, have a great day, everybody.
Take care. Ciao.
Bye.